Well, hello everybody. Welcome to the channel. This is the Bryant Report. I'm your host, Mike Bryant, and we're going to be continuing on in our timeline series, and which we kicked off last week. Hope everybody's doing well. We got another week in the books here at the start of another weekend, and last weekend I had actually driven up to Adamsville, Tennessee, and that's a pretty good drive from where I'm at. I mean, it's a good 11-ish hour drive up there, but I was happy to do it. I stopped in at the Pauline Pusser Museum, and we had Robert Broughton there. He was doing a book signing, so it was nice to sit and meet him and discuss all things Pauline Pusser. Also talking about the TBI investigation and his new book and all of that. And I also got to meet some folks that said that they had watched the last video, and so that was kind of neat to meet some people that actually watched one of my videos. So that's the first time that's ever happened to me. So if any of you folks are watching and you remember that, just it was good to meet you. And and I would encourage it, anybody, if you're interested, and you're going to be taking road trips this year. I know we're getting close to summertime, and the weather's starting to get nice, and people want to get out and about. So consider stopping into the museum and checking it out. It's there's a lot there to look at. It's pretty low cost to go in. I mean, it's only like $10 for adults, I think, and less for children. And it's a pretty neat experience. There's like a when you go in, there's a little movie presentation that you watch, and it's not very long, but it kind of gives you some of the background in case you're not up to speed on things. And then after that, you're kind of free to wander around the home and check out just the multitude of exhibits. And one interesting thing about it, just aside from the history with Pauline Pusser and everything, they basically have kept all the furniture and stuff from that time period. So it's almost like going back in time, to like a home in the 60s or 70s. So that in and of itself is kind of neat. But they have they have all kinds of exhibits, news articles, pictures, you name it, and it's a cool experience just to wander around and check everything out. And then they also have a gift shop, so if you want to buy some souvenirs, T-shirts, they have books that various authors have written about the subject, and so I highly encourage it. Get out there, check it out. It's a cool thing to see. And also there's a lot of other historical sites around the area. I mean, we're pretty close to the Shiloh battlefield, Civil War battlefield area, and so that's pretty interesting just by itself. I mean, you could spend easily a whole day wandering around over there. And you got the Natchez Trace Parkway, which is a very scenic route to drive through. If you're big into wildlife and nature and all that. So definitely just wanted to put a plug in for that. Consider it. If, like I said, if you're in the area or if you're going to be driving through the area, consider adding that to your itinerary. But yeah, like I said, it was a good visit, and I learned a lot. And Robert's pretty knowledgeable fellow, and he imparted a lot of knowledge on me that I wasn't aware of. So So definitely, get the book and check it out. He gives a good breakdown of a lot of the folks that were interviewed, a lot of the context, a lot of the backstory. So highly encourage that too. I'm not getting paid to say that. I'm not getting a dime out of any of his book sales or anything, but I think it's, there's a lot of misinformation out there, and the best way to combat that is to get the right information out, and or at least get an alternative viewpoint. So definitely, I highly recommend that book. I have a copy of it. I've read it, and again, it's very informative. And so that's enough about all of that. And so where we left off last week, and just before we move on, the last video, I guess there was some interest in that video, and apparently my biggest fan watched the video, and he's a guy that is very, he watches all my videos. He's always supportive of me, and I think he kind of, he's always saying how he wants to be like me. So that's kind of interesting. And so we will have a new little segment that we'll start adding to this channel. Maybe I'll consider it where we delve into some fan mail. So I know a lot of you people may not be interested in that, and I don't blame you. I'm not really that interested in it myself, but I'm going to tack that on to the end of this video, so that way none of you folks that are here for the real information are bored and off put by that. So I'll put that at the end. So if you're not into that, you won't have to be bothered by it, and if you're interested, you can stick around. But without further ado, let's go ahead and dive into it, shall we? All right, so when we left off on the last video in the timeline, we were talking about, I believe we were talking about how Agent Parson was meeting with Mike Elam and Dennis Hathcock at a motel in Selmer, Tennessee in the evening time. And we didn't, the TBI did not provide us with any information of what was discussed, how long was the meeting. There's no audio recordings of anybody in that meeting. So a lot of mystery around that. But one thing I left out, what I kind of skipped over accidentally, was that in June 21st of 2023, that was when the TBI, they went to interview Kirksey Nix, and he's in a federal prison in El Reno, Oklahoma. And I think that was kind of because one of my biggest criticisms of the newer investigation, the one that they reopened things, and one that Mike Parson was involved in, was that it just seemed like, when the initial investigation kind of wound down, when we left off, Buford and Pauline both were considered victims, and they had all these suspects that they were looking at. Kirksey Nix was one of them. And of course, then, like I said, it just kind of, the case was closed pending new information. So it wasn't like officially closed, but it was basically, hey, until we get something new, some new leads, some new information, this is it. And so that's where it was. Now, fast forward to 2023, when the case reopens, we're all, it just seemed like they already had focused in on Buford. So it's like they just totally disregarded what was done before in the investigation and just reset everything with Buford being the suspect. And now let's go make up some stuff and see if we can find some stuff to corroborate that. And so perhaps, I don't know, perhaps Mike Parson and his folks at the TBI, maybe they anticipated that that might be troublesome. And so what they do is, hey, let's go see if we can interview Kirksey Nix, and so that's what they did. There was Mike Parson, there was Mark Davidson, the district attorney general, and then one of his associates. There was an agent from the TBI, and there was another TBI agent that was with them. And so they all traveled to Oklahoma to talk to Kirksey Nix, and I've uploaded the audio recording of that interview. The quality of that recording is not very good. I think part of the problem was there was probably a pretty good distance from where Parson was sitting and Kirksey was sitting. So you got that. You've got other people in the room. You hear chairs moving. The acoustics wasn't great. So it's a very poor quality audio recording, but they did put a transcript of that interview in the TBI report. Excuse me, and it's pretty lengthy, but there's not a whole lot of good information in there. Kirksey, just to kind of like give you a quick summary of it. Kirksey kind of goes flip-flops a little because he seems to indicate that he's got information about what happened, but then he won't say what that information is, and a lot of that kind of revolves around his I don't know, his personal code, if you will, or the code of the criminal. He doesn't want to be a rat, and so he doesn't divulge anything there. And then the TBI, they seem to try to see if they want to try to get him to take a polygraph, and he doesn't go for that. But one of the things about it that was kind of interesting, one little tidbit that I caught was, Mike Parson was asking him a couple questions, and the first question was, and let me see if I can pull that up over here while we're talking about it. Let's see, this right here. This is part of the transcript from that interview, and you can see. Let's see here. Oh yeah, if you see the timestamp is 13:45, Q3. If you're reading the transcript, that's Mike Parson when he's the one asking this question. So it says, so if somebody were to say that you were witness providing Buford with a rifle, would that be possible? And then of course Kirksey replies, it would be absolutely false, completely false. Now, where did Parson get this providing Buford with a rifle? Where did he get that? Well, it's not. I've read all through the original report, and it's not really reported in there. Now there is somebody that says in the original report that Kirksey Nix was in the area with some others, and that he was, I guess, seen driving around or something. But this part here about this gun exchange, well, that comes from Dennis Hathcock. That's that right there was a theory that Dennis Hathcock put out there. Because if you remember, he tells that story about how he's in Eastview at that park, and he's watching Buford, and he's supposedly meeting with Ann Henderson, and then she leaves, and then this Chevy Biscayne pulls up, and they both pop their trunks, and according to Dennis, Buford gave this person in the Chevy Biscayne some rifles, and then that person drives off. And then of course he was asked if he could give a description of the guy who was driving the Chevy Biscayne, and he couldn't. But this, keep in mind that when Parson interviews him and gets that story, that's in July of 2023. So Parson hadn't sat down with Dennis yet to get that story, but it does prove that he was watching Mike Elam's YouTube channel because Dennis had told that story on video on Mike Elam's channel, and there's also Facebook posts. There's a lot of Facebook posts about it throughout the years, and so that definitely lets us know that that he was in the area, or that he was monitoring social media. He told us that, but this is definitely an indication of that. Of course, you look up another little interesting point about this little screenshot here. If you look at right at the top where the timestamp is 1334 Q3, which is Mike Parson again, he asks him another question here. But you'd recognize the guy if you saw him, right? He's like tall as a tree, right? I mean, and then of course, Kirksey answers, I may have seen a picture of him. Well, this just kind of speaks to, Mike Parson and his ability as a investigator. I mean, if you're interviewing a guy who was previously a suspect and really could be a suspect still, and you're asking him about, to give a description of somebody, or did you recognize a guy? Well, you don't want to lead him. You don't want to lead the guy. You don't want to put words in his mouth. And because so he says right here, you recognize the guy if you saw him, right? He's like tall as a tree. Well, why would you put that in there? If I'm interviewing a suspect or a witness, I don't want to influence what they're going to tell me. I don't want to lead them. I don't want to plant information in their mind. So that comment right there is kind of just weird to me. But I don't know. You guys can let me know what you think about that. All right. So that was the interview of Kirksey Nix in the federal prison. And then, of course, we jump forward to July 10th, when Parson meets with Mike Elam and Dennis Hathcock in Selmer, Tennessee. And keep in mind, in the midst of all of this that's going on, there's an ongoing search that the TBI is conducting at various locations for evidence, the shell casings, the blood evidence, any more additional files that they're looking for. So that's going on at various times throughout this initial phase but I mean, there's so many points of that I didn't want to put it all in the timeline here, but just know that that's kind of going on in the backdrop in between some of these things here. Okay, so all right, so they meet with Dennis and Mike the evening of July 10th. And again, we don't know what was discussed. There's no record of that. But then the next day is July 11th, and that's when the TBI goes out and they interview Ann Henderson and Dennis Hathcock. For Ann Henderson, they go talk to her first, and then they follow that up by talking to Dennis. Now, let's see if I can pull this up over here. And let's see if I can get the documents up here. Okay, so let me pull this up. All right, okay, so hold on here. All right, so this is Ann Henderson's her file that they got. So again, they did a recording. They did an interview with her. Now this first interview, and we know that they did several interviews. They go to her home, and this time it was Mike Parson and Brent Booth. They drop by her house, and it's in the evening time, about 6:30. So they probably knew she was at work, and they probably were going to try to talk to her after work. But she doesn't really give them a whole lot of information this trip, and I guess she had a meeting to go to, and then she alludes to she was suspicious of the death surrounding Buford, and was asking if they were investigating that, but they weren't really looking into that, so they didn't really get a lot out of that interview, or not what they had hoped anyway. So yeah, that was the interview. Wasn't, like I said, they didn't get the information. So after they leave her, they go talk to Dennis. And if we can pull that up. All right, so they go talk to Dennis. And let me see if we can pull this up here. All right, well, anyway, let's see if we can zoom this in a little bit. All right, so they go interview Dennis, and Dennis gives us his whole breakdown of the timeline, with him following around Buford the night the night leading up to the ambush. And he tells the whole story about him going to the park in Eastview and seeing Buford meeting up with Ann Henderson, and then of course he tells her, "Oh, get the hell out of here," and then she leaves, and then the Chevy Biscayne pulls in, and then that's when we have this gun exchange. Which, by the way, there's different versions of this gun exchange out there. If you go watch some of the videos that Mike Elam has with Dennis, sometimes, he tells it where Buford is receiving the weapons, and then when he talks to the TBI, he's got it that, Buford is giving the Chevy Biscayne guy, the mystery man from Oklahoma, rifles. And so, that already creates some problems in my mind when it comes to Dennis and his reliability as a witness. And of course, we know that Ann Henderson tells a different version of that whole Eastview Park scenario. Whereas Dennis claims that Ann actually went into the park and met with Buford, she totally refutes that. But anyway, Dennis gives us his whole recreation of that, and how Buford, after meeting with the Chevy Biscayne guy, Dennis heads up to Selmer, because Buford went to Selmer to go stop by where Ann Henderson was living. And again, we get different accounts of that. Dennis claims that Buford went in the house with Ann. Ann says no, he never went inside. So there's that. And finally, because Mike Parson kind of tries to hammer down on the timeline. And according to Dennis, Buford leaves that area and heads back to Adamsville around about 2:30. That was according to Dennis. And now what's interesting about that, and let's see if I can pull this up. So remember, 2:30, he's supposed to be heading to Adamsville. Let's see if let me bring up something here. Well, yeah, first we can Let's see if we can bring this up. Hold on, let me see if I can zoom this out a little bit. All right. Now here's a little. This is the Jerry Heacock condo news article. So if you guys are paying attention to if you guys have a copy of the TBI report, this is actually one of the things that's in the TBI report, and I believe they got this. I believe they got this article from Mike Elam, but I'm not 100% sure on that. I could be wrong on that. I'll have to go double check it. But nonetheless, they have this article. And you see how I've got it circled in red, and towards the bottom of that red, that write-up that's circled in red, it says, let me see if I can zoom it in a little bit better. It says another eyewitness says he saw, let me see if I can pull this over a little bit. Okay, I think that's better. Okay, so it says right there, it says another eyewitness said he saw Pusser early that morning exchanging guns with another person driving a car with Oklahoma tags. This witness had personal reasons for playing detective and spying on Pusser's activities from time to time. Pusser eluded him prior to 4 a.m. Okay. This witness is Dennis Hathcock, son of W.O. Hathcock, former owner of the Plantation Inn. Dennis lives in Selmer. Well, now that's interesting because this condo news article, it says that Pusser had eluded Dennis before 4 a.m. And that's according to Dennis. So this is another retelling of Dennis, and this time he's saying that he didn't even see Buford before 4 a.m. So that's very interesting. And of course, at the top of this little, and we'll talk about this more in a second, it says here, it is fair to state that no one around Selmer, Tennessee, familiar with the case believes Pusser's story of Pauline's death. It is very likely they had a fight at their home over God knows what, and Pusser hit Pauline, and she grabbed her double-barreled Derringer and shot him first, and then he shot her. There is one unconfirmed story, though my reliable source swears he was told this by a close friend of Pauline's that tells of Pauline's coming home about 2:30 to get some of her clothing, planning to leave Pusser, and was surprised by Pusser, who came home unexpectedly. My source's source said she waited in a parked car down the street and saw Pusser drive up. She says she heard shooting and took off. Now, I'm sure a lot of you folks that are watching this, some of you guys have been watching my videos regularly. We all know who he's referencing here. This would be, of course, LaVon Plunk. Petey Plunk's wife. And so now Heacock is careful to say that he didn't get that. He didn't talk to LaVon Plunk, but his source. So you can only imagine, you can use your deductive reasoning to kind of figure out who this source is. I think we all kind of know, but it's just interesting. This is another little piece of the puzzle. But just keep that timeline, kind of piece together this timeline. But anyway, what's important here is that according to Dennis, he didn't even see Buford before 4 a.m., but then he's telling the TBI decades later that he saw all this activity by Buford between 12:30 and 2:30 in the morning. So it's interesting how the memory, reorganizes itself for a lot of these people. But yeah, that was, let's see, we can zoom this back out, move this back over, and we'll go back to Dennis. And okay, so let's bring this up and see if we can reorganize my screen here. Put this down here. Okay. All right. Okay, so this is one of the things that they did during this interview on July 11th with Dennis Hathcock is Mike Parson had him draw a map of the crime scene to describe what all he's seeing. And now this right here is a drawing, I believe, of the second crime scene, the second ambush site. And so you can see he's got the holes that he's drawn out. And so this is the center line, center of the road. And I guess this over here would be the left side of the road. And he's basically talking about how there's all these holes. He's drawn them, and then so there's holes scattered around in the middle of the road. And then there's also a pile of holes over here. And then, of course, over in the ditch is Pauline's scalp and brain matter over here. Now this is on New Hope Road, and so we got that. So he puts all this out here. So now we know from other witnesses, though, we know from the original TBI report that the holes had already been picked up by Bill Fullwood and I want to say it was Lester Burns. I might be wrong on that. I might have that one wrong, but there was two guys from the different sites, and they had already picked up the holes, and they turned those over to Warren Jones. Warren Jones documented that. So, Dennis is saying that the holes are still out there, but we know from other witnesses that those holes had already been picked up. So that's just another interesting tidbit. And then, of course, Parsons had this photograph of the crime scene, and he had Dennis, I guess, sign the photograph and label who all was there. So we got Petey Plunk up here walking on the road. We got Dennis. We got Johnny Harrison, R.C. Matlock, and he doesn't know who this person is. But so we get that piece of information from him, and then let's see. Let's go back to our timeline. So we'll go back to the timeline here. And so that's basically what we got out of the interviews from Ann Henderson and Dennis. And then on July 12th, we got the TBI meets with John Sloan Jr., and then we got a crime scene walkthrough on New Hope Road with Dennis. So they meet up with Dennis again. And then, of course, somebody stopped by the Pusser Museum, and they did a search for .30 caliber casings. And I'll talk about that in a second. But let's talk about this. Let's see if I can bring up this from John Sloan Jr. So clearly, obviously, John Sloan Jr. is the son of the original John Sloan TBI agent. See if I want to bring up the exhibit from the TBI report documenting that. Okay, here we go. So we'll go ahead and bring that up. All right. So this was they went and met with John Sloan Jr. Again, his dad was TBI John Sloan, who was assigned to the case with Warren Jones, and they're looking for the files. They're basically talking to him to see if he's got if he's found any of his dad's case files. Excuse me. But he says that he doesn't have any, and that but he's going to go through his mom and dad's estate and let him know if he finds something. And so this is just a continuation of them trying to track down files, evidence, things of that nature. All right. And then let's see. So the other thing, so the next thing was the crime scene walkthrough on New Hope Road. And we already looked at a couple of photographs, and we can bring that up real quick. And of course, this is just a photograph of Dennis pointing out things that he saw on the road, and there's also a video file. There's a video file of this in the TBI report. And then here's another photograph of Dennis pointing things out. And so there's that. Now let's go back to our timeline. Oh yeah, and so I was going to talk about so they sent somebody to the museum to see if they could find some .30 caliber casings. And you kind of see where they're going with that, because by this time they've got the Ricky Plunk rifle, but they don't have any of the original shell casings found at the crime scene to compare it to that way they could positively identify this rifle. And they really don't have any way of proving, like, even if that was the murder weapon, you'd still have to find a way to tie that rifle to Buford, and they don't have that. All they've got is a bunch of gossip. They've got people that aren't even alive anymore, and they're trying to tie him through gossip to this rifle. But so they figure, well, if we can go find some shell casings at the museum, well, then we could at least, that might give us a tie-in to tying that rifle to Buford. But again, they didn't find anything, so it was really a nothing burger, if you will. So yeah, that just shows you the lengths that they were going to, because they knew that they had problems with their case. They always knew that. So that was on July 12th. So they had a busy 10th, 11th, and 12th, and then the next thing on the timeline, as we can see, is July 20th, 2023. The TBI interviews Lyda Ruth Travis, and let me see if I can bring up her statement or her documentation in the TBI report here. Okay, that's not it. Where are you at? No. Okay. Here we go. All right, so this is... So July 20th, they met with Lyda Ruth Travis. So who was Lyda Ruth Travis? Well, she stated that she worked at McNairy County Sheriff's Department in the jail and on the road for 21 years and was the 911 director for 19 years. Travis reported that she started working for McNairy County Sheriff Clifford Coleman in 1972. Travis stated, "Thank God she never worked for Buford Hayes Pusser." So right off the bat, at least I guess I have to give her props. At least she's telling us her bias right up front. She couldn't stand Buford. Okay, so right off the bat, we get that out of the But her contribution to the whole thing, I mean, okay, so she talks about this conversation that she had at with Jim Moffitt, and apparently she was working at a truck stop in Selmer, and so one evening Jim Moffitt pops in and he says something. He tells her, Ruth, I've got to get out of here before I get killed. What are you talking about, Jim? And he said, I just got to quit. There's too much going on. Now, they added in here that Jim Moffitt was talking about getting killed by Buford. Now, I have listened to that recording, and again, all these recordings I've uploaded to my YouTube channel, so all of y'all, if anybody doubts anything or they're not clear on something, you can feel free to go check them out. But I don't believe that she said that. Now, I'm sure that we've got some astute folks that are going to let me know in the comments, and feel free, if I've got that wrong, let me know in the comments. And if I'm wrong, and give me the timestamp on it. But I've listened to that recording, and I don't remember her saying that Jim Moffitt was talking about getting killed by Buford Hayes Pusser. But at any rate, let's see. She also, I think she gives us some information. Let me go here. Okay. She gives us some more information. Oh yeah, she also claims that she was told by a neighbor who lived across the street from Buford and Pauline, that they saw Buford carrying Pauline over his shoulder and then put her in the car the night of the ambush. So there's that. And then she comes in with her bias. She stated that she's always believed in her heart that Buford killed Pauline. And then she tells some other story about, she says, she mentioned one night Buford drove up in front of the truck stop where she worked and had been shot in the face. Travis stated that this was before the ambush. Buford Hayes Pusser's jaw was hanging down and they called for an ambulance. So I don't know. Seems like she's got some memory issues. She's probably up in years too. But she's the only one that's told that story. I mean, yes, Buford had gotten shot in January of '67, but I don't think his jaw was hanging down, and I don't think he went to the truck stop. I believe he went straight to the hospital. But this is, this is what you're getting. This is, and I've said this so many times, when you've got a cold case that's damn near 60 years old, and you don't have physical evidence, you don't have eyewitnesses, you don't have a murder weapon, and most of the people involved are dead and gone, and you try to reopen the case and investigate it as if it just happened. And you're having to rely on witnesses that are, and I'm not saying this to be mean, but they're up in years, they've got health issues, their memory fades, or they might have memory problems, and this is the kind of stuff you get, and of course the TBI, they didn't vet any of this stuff, they just collected it, they threw the net out, and they just took it all in, and they just threw it out here. And whatever salacious claims people made, they just threw it in the report, just to further smear Buford. Because if you can muddy Buford up enough, then you can believe he'd be capable of anything. So, of course, they didn't want to discount any negative story. But getting back to this, then she basically gives them some information on some possible girlfriends and people that Buford was running around with. So that's what we got from Lida Ruth. She just seems like a person that was definitely had some bias and some hatred for Buford, probably before she even went into working for law enforcement herself, you know. But so that's that. And so let's go check out the timeline. So that was July 20th. Okay, now July 21st, Mike Elam starts emailing Agent Parson some stuff. And so he emailed a recording of an interview he did with Levon Plunk, a recording of an interview he did with Bill Way. I don't have it on the timeline here, but he also sent him the Bill Way recording. And he didn't have, and oddly enough, he didn't have an audio recording of Ward Moore, which seems kind of weird, but he wrote out some notes that he took down in regards to this supposed interview he did with Ward Moore. And so let me see if I can pull up. So we'll start with Levon Plunk, if I can pull that up. Okay, here we go. All right, so let me pull this up. All right, now, and this is another audio recording, an audio file, and this is another one that I've got uploaded to my channel, so you can go check it out. It's a very short audio recording. It's less than 5 minutes, and for some reason it's not the entire recording. So it's just for whatever reason, we only get a snippet of this conversation, and of course this comes from Mike Elam, the esteemed cold case investigator and author of Buford Pusser, The Other Story. Some might suggest that he's an Oakley Baldwin wannabe, but I didn't say that. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying I've heard rumors. People have suggested that. But you know, we don't get the full conversation, so we don't know what was said before. We don't know what was said after. So take that as you will. Now, over the years, Mike Elam has credited Levon Plunk with telling us a story about that she dropped Pauline off at the house, and she was afraid of Buford, so she didn't want to go in the house. So she pulled her car down the street and parked while Pauline went in to, I guess, pack her things and get out. And that's what the plan was. But at some point, Buford comes home, goes in the house, and then she hears gunshots, and then she drives away. Now, that's a story that's been told by Mike Elam and his supporters countless times. I believe it's also in his book. And so, given the fact we got this audio recording, I was expecting to hear that. But of course, you don't hear that. She doesn't give you that. So, you know, where did we get that? Well, I pulled up that. Actually, we can go take a look. We can take a look right here. And let me see if I can pull this over. All right, hold on. Okay, here we go. So right there, that top paragraph in the red circled area, it is fair to state that no one around Selmer, Tennessee, familiar with the case, believes Pusser's story. Very likely had a fight at their home, God knows what. Pusser hit Pauline. She grabbed her double-barreled Derringer and shot him first, and then he shot her. And then we talk about this unconfirmed story. Though my reliable source swears he was told this by a close friend of Pauline's that tells of Pauline's coming home about 2:30 a.m. to get some of her clothing and was surprised by Pusser, who came home unexpectedly. My source's source. Don't you just love a source of a source? Don't you love that? I mean, a source of a source. Okay. Anyway, I mean this is what's wrong like with mainstream media. How many times we see news articles attributed to an anonymous source that we find out months later was all bullshit. But this is what we get here. My source's source said she waited in a parked car down the street and saw Pusser drive up. She says she heard shooting and took off. Now, and this is the Condo News article, just to give you guys a little, just so you guys can see that. This was, and it's dated, if you look up here, January 21st, 1981, from the Condo News. This was the Jerry Heacock article. So that's where that came from, in case you guys were wondering. But yeah, back to the so she never gives us the story about the shooting and being parked down the street. And she seems to have a lot of memory problems in this recording. She can't even recall when Pauline was murdered. She doesn't even know. She didn't know if she was separated or if they were together, even though the TBI took it out of context and said that they were separated. And she did say something about they were living in a motel in Savannah. She did throw that out there. But if she's in a motel with the kids, because somebody was asking about, or they were asking her about the kids, or Mike Elam asked about the kids. According to Levon, the kids were in a motel in Savannah. That's interesting. If the kids were in a motel in Savannah, you would think she wouldn't need to stop by the house. She would just gather up her kids and go back to her family in Virginia or wherever they were staying. So a lot of problems with the Levon recording. Like I said, it really wasn't that impressive to me. She didn't seem to have a very good memory. She seemed to have some health issues. And again, not to keep harping on it, but this is a 60-year cold case, and that recording was way before they even reopened this, and she passed away. But an interesting factoid about this, and I will be happy to show this part of it. Now this is a post. Let me see if I can get this. Get this pulled up here properly so you guys can read it. Okay, so this was a post on Mike Elam's Facebook page, and it's from a lady by the name of Sheila Kidd, and Levon Plunk was her mother. Now, she claims that Levon was home with her and her brother, so she couldn't have been out gallivanting around town with Pauline the night before or the night of the ambush. So this begs the question, why didn't the TBI interview Sheila Kidd? I mean, they accepted this recording of Levon Plunk. They talked to Ricky Plunk and, of course, got this rifle. But knowing that there was somebody else, another relative, why not talk to that person? Seems odd. I mean, if you're going to talk to Ricky Plunk, and if you're out here, because the TBI, they claimed they wanted to talk to people that were familiar that had anything to say, people that were alive back then, well, here you go. Here you go. I mean, you can't claim that you did your due diligence on this investigation and you miss out on something like this. Excuse me. So very, very odd. And of course, you see Mike Elam's response. Well, why did she tell a different story to me? Well, did she? Did she, Mike? Do you have proof? Do you have proof that she said? Because according to this, according to this little audio snippet you gave us, there's no proof of that. There's no proof of that, Mike. So why did she tell a different story to me, Jerry Heacock, and several others and others? Well, according to Jerry Heacock, she didn't tell him that story. So that's strike two on you, Mike. So Levon Plunk, I mean, didn't tell you that story, and she didn't tell Jerry Heacock. And that's coming from Jerry Heacock. Even he doesn't say that she told that story. So, and that's, someone who loves to sit up here and lecture us all about what a great investigator you are, and you've been on the case for decades, and you've been out here, talking to people. You can't even get your own facts right, dude. I mean, she didn't tell you that story, and if she did, where's the proof? Where's the proof, Mike? You got a recording of it? I mean, you gave us a recording, but it's not on that recording. You got another recording? Something you withheld from the TBI? And if you did, then why did you withhold it? And, again, he's making claims that she told this to Jerry Heacock. Well, according to Jerry Heacock, he had a source of a source. Source of a source. That's not direct evidence, Mike. So, very interesting. Very interesting. Okay, so that was Levon Plunk. And then the next thing is Bill Way. Let's see if we can find that out, or find that little okay, well, apologize, folks, for this. Let me see. I think we got it coming up here. Got to see this. There's just so many files in this case. All right, so this is from Bill Way. Now, Bill Way, I guess, he was a reporter, photographer with the news, one of the newspapers in that area back in the day. The Commercial Appeal in Memphis, that was the newspaper he worked for. And then later on, he was, I guess, a radio personality out of Jackson, Tennessee. And this was back in September 2009. Mike Elam did a phone call and recorded it, and then he provided this to the TBI. Now, I've talked about this before in another video. I've also got this recording. If anybody is curious, it's up on the channel. You can check it out. The audio quality is not the greatest. I don't know what Mike Elam was using to record the phone call, but it wasn't that great. But the long and short of what Bill Way told him was that apparently, according to him, when the morning of the ambush, Warren Jones picks him up and they drive together down to McNairy County to the crime scene, and he photographed the crime scene, the car, everything, and then he gives us some information about that. And he also talks a little bit about Pauline's injuries. And he also gives us some indication that that Buford and Pauline were, I guess, both kind of running around on each other, and that they hung out a lot in some nightclubs in Jackson, Tennessee. That's pretty much the long and short of what Bill Way tells us. Now, Bill, and they left it out, the TBI left it out of the write-up on here, but one of the things that Bill says is that Pauline had a bullet wound in the neck. Now, we all know that that's not true. We've got the autopsy. She was not shot in the neck. So this comes into play when you're dealing with somebody years later. The memory's not the best, and that is the problem. If you're going to solve one of these cold cases, if you don't have like a confession or some hard DNA evidence, you're better off just leaving it alone, because you get stuff like this. And he might, to be fair, because I know somebody called me out about, because I said that he lied. Well, and you know what? That's a fair criticism. And what I will say is that memory fades. And you also conflate things, especially when you're talking about something that happened decades in the past. And so him being a reporter / photographer, he probably did see a lot of different crime scenes and have to photograph things. And so perhaps in his mind, he's running things together. So it's not necessarily that he lied, but that he misremembered. So I'll be generous and I'll say that he misremembered. But either way, what he said is provably not true. She was not shot in the neck. And he also states that he was the only one, that all of the photographs out there was attributed to him. And I showed in a previous video that he was not the only one. There was other photographers there taking pictures, crime scene photographs. And so the point of what I bring up there is that obviously his memory is not the greatest on this, and he's misremembering things. So I don't know that I would, put a lot of stock in what he's telling us. I'm sure some of this was probably true, but it's just not reliable, in my opinion. That's my opinion. So, and I'm basing it, and I'm not just pulling it out of thin air. If the guy is telling us a story, and I can show you two things that wasn't true about the story, then you got to question the rest of it, in my opinion. Because let's just think about this. If this was a trial in a court, don't you think that a defense attorney would latch on to something like that? Don't you think that on cross-examination, that's something that they would hone in on? So, I know people, you're nitpicking. But they have no problem, just beating to death what Buford said. Anything Buford did gets questioned. But if I dare to highlight things that are provably not true, then I'm nitpicking. But whatever. So that's the Bill Way. That's the Bill Way article or interview, excuse me. All right, so that leads us to Ward Moore. So I'm going to see, let me pull up the Ward Moore information here. Okay. All right, let me see. Go ahead and pull this up, and boom. Let's see if we can zoom this in a little bit better. Okay, so now what I was saying before, what I was talking about before was that Mike Elam had supposedly interviewed Ward Moore. Now, he didn't have an audio recording for Ward Moore, so what he does, he typed up his notes from this supposed interview. Now, Ward Moore, he talks about a lot of things, allegedly, and, you know, there's this insinuation that Buford had, or what, because remember, when Buford got elected, prior to that, well, during that election season, we'll say, because Dickie Moore was the sheriff and he was running for re-election. Well, of course, he dies in a car wreck right before the election. And according to Ward Moore, now Ward Moore, in case you didn't know, he was the coroner at that time. And I guess the way the law is written in Tennessee, that in the event that the sheriff, you know, passes away or for whatever reason can't serve, the coroner would fill in. And so when Dickie died, Ward Moore stepped in as the interim sheriff until the election could be held. And according to the story, as the story goes, you know, let's get that, let me throw that in there. Ward Moore gets a phone call from Louise Hathcock and says something about, you know, her horse died and she's got to buy a new sheriff. And she enlists the help of Ward Moore to, you know, to facilitate bribing a law enforcement official. I mean, that's what we're talking about, you know. So Ward Moore implicates himself in a conspiracy to bribe a law enforcement officer. So, but now you're asking me to, you know, believe this guy, an admitted criminal. You know what I'm saying? So, okay. Well, anyway, you know, one of the things that he also tells the story. He also tells the story about that there is no ambush, and somehow Pauline was dead before she ever got there, and that there's something that happened at the home. And if you look at the highlighted text down here, it says it is in his opinion, and nothing official here, but his opinion, that it was not an ambush. He feels that Pauline was dead before they ever arrived to New Hope Road. He did tell us that he knew for a fact, and he did not reveal the source, nor did we ask, but he informed us that a call was made to someone stating that there was a shootout taking place between Buford and Pauline there at the home in Adamsville. He said he knew this to be fact. He also told us, and I will quote him in this, "Fellas, you guys would have just had to seen that car." He told us there was no way that from the way that car looked and the position of the bullet holes that it could have went down the way Pusser said it did. And then he talks about shell casings. And yeah, so basically he's implying, and this goes back to the story that, you know, he got this phone, or supposedly Carl Pusser, Buford's dad, had called him and said that he needed to get over to their house because Buford and Pauline were into it, and who knows what's going to happen, you know. And so supposedly he shows up over there, and I guess by the time he got there, nobody was there, and supposedly he saw some drops of blood on the floor. Now, you know, and this is that implication that, you know, Buford killed, unalived Pauline at the residence, then put her in the car, then drives out to New Hope Road, and then goes through this elaborate staging of a crime scene, you know. Well, this one is easy to debunk. This is like one of the easiest ones to debunk out of, you know. A lot of it's easy to debunk, but this one for sure, because we have an autopsy report. We have an autopsy report. We also have the medical examiner's report from back in 1967 from Dr. Peeler. There's photographs, okay? And so we know beyond all doubt, for 1,000% certainty, that Pauline was only shot in her head. She was not shot in any other portion of her body except her head. Okay, we know that. And we also know about the brain matter and all of that. Okay. Well, knowing that part of it, there's no way that Buford shot her in the home. That we can rule that out right now. And anybody still suggesting that, you're on crack. Okay, just say no to drugs. You know, if you're watching this video and you're still clinging to this tall tale about Buford shooting Pauline in their home and then carrying her and putting her in the car, you're smoking crack. You really are, and you need to get help, because the only place that she was shot was in the head and by a rifle. So Buford would have had to have shot her in the head in the home, which means that there would have been brain matter, skull fragments, probably a bullet hole in the wall somewhere. You know what I'm saying? So we can just stop with that. And I don't want to see, if you come into my comments section, go ahead and post it, but I'm not going to respond to it. I'm not even going to entertain it, because we know we can prove it didn't happen. We can prove it. So there's that. But, you know, and then also he talks about, there's another interesting little tidbit about this. If you look at the top, this right here, let's see. Mr. Moore transported the body of Pauline Pusser to the Shackelford funeral home, where he also worked as embalmer and funeral director. He informed us that her head was partially decapitated. He described to us that just about the entire top of her head was gone. He said it took hours to get her made up enough to present her remains to the family. He said he was the one who embalmed, made up, worked on, and placed Pauline Pusser in the casket. Now, there is another interview, and this is going to happen further down the line in the timeline, but we also know that that's more than likely not true, or at least there's some dispute about it. I'll say that. There's some dispute about that, because there's a gentleman by the name of Donald Smith who was the ambulance driver the morning of the ambush that transported Buford and Pauline to the hospital. Well, one of his other jobs was that, he worked at the funeral home and he prepared the bodies and all of that. And he tells the story about, he's the one that prepared her body. Okay? So, just throwing that out there. And that audio recording is also up on my channel. You can go check that out. So, there's that. But that was pretty much the long and short of the Ward Moore story. And so let's get back to the timeline here. All right, sorry about that, folks. I had a phone call real quick. But anyway, back to the timeline. So that was July 21st. July 24th, the TBI met with Dennis to discuss a recorded interview on the New Hope Road crime scene. So they met with Dennis, and apparently they wanted to do a recorded interview with him, a video recording, I'm assuming. Because the thing of that is that he's the last. Well, actually, let me see if I can pull that up. I don't know if it's here or not. I don't know if I got that or not. Maybe I did. I might have forgot to put that in here. But it doesn't really matter. Basically, the gist of it is they said that since he's the last surviving person to be at the crime scene, that they wanted to document this for historical purposes but they did not include that in the TBI file. So you're not going to get, if you send off to get a copy of the file, it's not in there. So I'll save you the suspense on that. But that's interesting that they said that he's the last surviving person, because we have Donald Smith. Donald Smith was there, and I don't know why they wouldn't have included him in that. But be that as it may, that was put in there, and like I said, there's no documentation that they didn't include it, so we don't know. But that just kind of shows you the favoritism that is afforded to folks that perpetuate the TBI's narrative. And then, lastly, July 25th, TBI interviews former agent Ray Presnell about polygraphs for Warren Jones. And let's see if I can pull that up. And here we go. And so Ray Presnell, I guess, was an agent with the TBI back then, and he did polygraphs. I guess that was his specialty. And they were, says here that Ray Presnell provided that he couldn't remember if he conducted any polygraph examinations in the case for former TBI Special Agent Warren Jones. However, Presnell informed agents that he did work cases with Warren Jones. And so really that nothing really relevant there, but then he gives us this little tidbit about, he says that Presnell explained that to the best of his knowledge, Warren Jones was trying to piece the case together to prove that Buford killed Pauline. Now, I don't know, that's another one of these things, and there's a telephone interview, but of course they don't give us the recording of this telephone interview. So now I have to trust that the TBI, knowing that they've put words in other people's mouths, because I just showed it on this video. Now we do know that Warren Jones did express concerns about the blood on the hood and the blood on the windshield, and that he took samples of the blood from the hood and the windshield, and he sent that off to the crime lab for the FBI for testing, and of course it came back inconclusive. So nobody can definitively say whose blood it was, So anybody claiming that blood is Pauline's blood, again, you're smoking crack, and you need to put the crack pipe down. Just say no to drugs, because that evidence doesn't exist. Okay, so anyway, and so who knows if Presnell might have talked to Warren Jones, and Warren Jones might have said mentioned that to him, and maybe that's where he got it. But take it for what it is. It's I'm calling balls and strikes here, so that's just that's what they put out. But there's no evidence in my mind, because if you actually go read the original case file, there's mention of Warren Jones all throughout there, how he believed Buford, and he was actually debunking things that were attributed to Buford, and he felt like it was other people that did it. So there is that. So that concludes the timeline portion of this video, and so like I said at the beginning of the video, I will I'm going to talk about our fan mail that we received within the last week and get into all that. But I know some of y'all aren't interested in that, and I completely understand, and I don't blame you, because drama, it's not really helpful. It's not going to help you with this, figuring out this case, but I will address it, because there's a lot of he did address it to me, and he took the time to type this thing out, and it's a long letter, so I want to accommodate my biggest fan. So that's the end of the timeline part. We'll get into the open letter part next, but let me know in the comments what you think about any of this. And so without further ado, let's get to the fan mail. All right. So what I will do is I will read the entire open letter that he wrote, and then I will address line by line I will respond to it. So let's get right to it. So, an open letter to Mike Bryant. I am neither threatened or jealous. It's unfortunate what social media has become and how easily it fuels emotion over evidence. Hollywood certainly didn't help, turning a story into something it never was, embellishing events and reshaping reality to fit a narrative. That influence still lingers, and some people remain deeply entrenched in it. There are two approaches here, one grounded in evidence, documentation, and forensic science, and another built almost entirely on opinion. To date, I've seen nothing from you beyond criticism of the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation and those who conducted the official investigation. Criticism alone is not evidence. In any legitimate investigation, you don't dismantle findings with opinion, you replace them with better evidence. So the question remains, what have you actually contributed? I submitted witness timelines, corroborated accounts, and information regarding the carbine, material that ultimately warranted review. More importantly, I shared that information with the proper authorities. What have you submitted to the TBI? Not speculation, actual evidence. Much of the public perception surrounding Buford Pusser was shaped by Joe Don Baker portraying a dramatized version of events in Walking Tall. It was a compelling performance, but it was not a documentary. Names were changed, events were altered or outright invented. And the result was a cinematic hero, not an accurate historical record. You've also questioned investigative techniques, interviews, and even the intentions of those involved while offering no substantiated alternatives, suggesting agencies are simply spending money on cold cases without evidence to support that claim. Doesn't strengthen your argument, it weakens it. And for clarity, cold cases are not closed. They go inactive due to a lack of new leads. That's standard investigative reality, not a conspiracy. At the end of the day, this comes down to a simple distinction. Evidence carries weight. Opinion does not. You are entitled to your opinions, but presenting them as equivalent to documented findings, corroborated witness accounts, and forensic analysis is simply not credible. So I'll ask again, clearly and directly, what evidence have you brought forward? Because until that question is answered, this isn't a debate between two positions. It's a contrast between documented investigation and unsupported speculation. Let's see. Okay, hold on. All right. What continues to be overlooked is the real story and the real victim. Pauline Pusser was not a subplot or a talking point. She was a living person, a mother of three whose life ended violently. Yet instead of focusing on the totality of the evidence surrounding her death, you seem fixated on isolated details while ignoring the broader and far more significant findings. You've suggested that my work and the TBI findings are essentially identical, as if that implies coordination or conspiracy. It doesn't. It suggests that when independent efforts follow the evidence, they tend to arrive at the same conclusions. That's not collusion, that's consistency. You've also implied a coordinated effort involving investigators, forensic specialists, and a district attorney general, along with individuals like Mark Davidson. That's a serious claim, and one that requires serious proof. So far, none has been presented. Let's talk about evidence versus opinion. You've raised questions about the carbine, yet failed to address why multiple individuals, O'Neill Moffett, P.D. Plunk, Ricky Plunk, Jim Moffett, and Carl Pusser, would all independently point back to the same source. That's not a minor coincidence. That's a pattern. If your position is that they're all lying, then explain why. Motive matters, and you haven't offered one. Instead, you ask for photographs, receipts, or documentation for a weapon that was alleged to be stolen. That's not investigative reasoning. That's deflection. You're applying standards that don't align with the circumstances while ignoring testimony that does. Okay. So that, my friends, is the letter. And let me go ahead and bring that down. Okay. So I took notes. So that was, as you can see, that was a long letter from our biggest fan, my biggest fan, excuse me. And I basically wrote down about 12 points out of that. I kind of had to distill it down a little bit because he kind of goes all over the place there. But to begin this, let me clarify something, because I feel like there's been some misinterpretations of me, of my videos, of this channel. Now, this channel, the point of this channel and the point of what I'm doing here is I like to look at historical cases. Essentially, I like to look at historical finished cases. So, because it's interesting to me as somebody who used to be an investigator in the Navy, I am always interested in the process that investigators undertook to solve the case. What was the evidence they collected, and what led them to solving the case. That's what interests me, and that's the point of this channel. And me getting into this case involving Buford Pusser and Pauline Pusser was I was interested to find out what the evidence was, what the process that the TBI took, to get to their conclusion. Because remember, their conclusion, and this was voiced by Mark Davidson when he stood on that stage, August 29th, 2025, was that if Buford were alive today, he would seek a grand jury indictment for the murder of Pauline Pusser. So that's a big claim, right? That's a big claim. And so I was interested to see what the evidence was. That's what keyed me into looking into this case, and ultimately starting the channel, and ultimately putting out videos. And so eventually I did get the case file, and that's what I've been doing ever since I got the case file. I've read the whole thing in its entirety. I've listened to all the audio recordings and watched the videos that they submitted with it. And I've also, I read Mike Elam's book. I went to his Facebook page and I've read all the posts. I haven't read every single one because it's been, it's kind of hard to. There's several years worth of posts, but I feel like I've read a great deal of them. And I've watched a lot of his videos on the subject. And we've talked about it. I've talked about it here on this channel. I've showed video clips, and so that's where my point of view is. That's what I'm doing. Okay, I am not a law enforcement officer. I don't work for any agency. I don't work for the TBI. I don't work for anybody. So the idea that I should be submitting evidence to the TBI is ridiculous. I have placed calls to, Mark Davidson's office to try to see if I could get some clarification. And I've had no response on that. But I mean, my interest is to look to see if they prove their case. So of course I have not submitted evidence to the TBI. I'm not out there collecting evidence. I'm not out there pounding the pavement. I'm not doing any of that. I'm just examining what has been submitted by the TBI and other folks related to the case. So that is my interest. So the first point he makes, or his allegations, that all I'm doing is criticizing. Yeah. yeah. Correct. Because what's the old saying? Trust but verify. So yeah, I don't. And let's be clear. There are many people that are in prison right now that were wrongly accused. We see it happen all the time where people get convicted wrongly, and on appeal they end up getting released from prison because new evidence comes in, DNA, what have you, witnesses. So just because someone, the TBI fingers somebody for a crime doesn't mean that they're right. So it warrants it. Criticism and scrutiny is warranted in situations like that, and I'm happy to do it. I was simply, like I said, trying to see if they got it right. He says legitimate investigations, you don't dismantle findings with opinion, you dismantle it with better evidence. Okay. But in this particular case, part of what they did, part of their investigation was opinions by their experts, right? And I've done videos on the experts that they had. Dr. Revelle, Corey Latham, Dr. Warren, the autopsy, all of that. At some point, they offered their opinions, even when there was lack of evidence. They did that, and I simply pointed it out. I haven't submitted anything to the TBI. You're right. I'm not an investigator. I'm not submitting things to the TBI. That's not my purview. That's not what I'm here for. Elam submitted witness timelines, corroborated accounts, and the carbine. Well, right off the bat, he did not submit the carbine to the TBI. Ricky Plunk did. According to the TBI, they received it from Ricky Plunk, not Mike Elam. Prove me wrong on that. Witness timelines, corroborated accounts. Well, let's talk about witness timelines and corroborated accounts. We just, in this very video, I showed you an example that where Dennis himself, disputed his own timeline, because in 1981 he says that Buford eluded him prior to 4 a.m. Decades later, he's revised that to say that he followed Buford from 12:30 a.m. to 2:30 a.m. So I mean, there's a problem there. And while we're on that, let me bring up something. Let me bring up something that's interesting from somebody we all know. If I can find it, bear with me. Just give me a moment. Okay. Yeah, let me bring this up. And okay. Right here we have a post on Mike Elam's Facebook page from Teresa Smith. Now, Teresa Smith, we all know, she and Tammy Johnson talked to the TBI, and they tell us the whole parking lot story, right? Now, here she posts, and this was 6 years ago. This was way back before she talked to the TBI. Don't forget, conversation outside Old Hickory, the early 2 a.m. meeting between Buford and his wife. Well, that's not a corroborated account. That conflicts with Dennis Hathcock. According to Teresa Smith, Buford and Pauline both are at the Old Hickory Grill parking lot at 2 in the morning. According to Dennis Hathcock, Buford is in Selmer, somewhere between 1:30 and 2:30. Now, you don't have to be Columbo or Matlock or the Murder, She Wrote lady to deduce that a man cannot be in two places at the same time. So that's a problem. That's a problem for you. So that, that's not a corroborated account. Okay? So, that's an interesting little tidbit. Okay, let's, and then he brings up the Walking Tall, the infamous Walking Tall movie. Well, I have said it so many times have I said it. The Walking Tall movie, yes, I have seen the Walking Tall movie, just like everybody and their mama has seen the Walking Tall movie, but I don't cite the Walking Tall movie ever as a source, for making an argument. Show me in any one of my videos where I have made a claim and used the Walking Tall movie to back it up. Doesn't happen. Okay, then he mentions Pauline and why I don't talk, I guess the claim is that I don't show any regard for Pauline. Well, I would dispute that. But let's talk about the folks that are supposed to be getting justice for Pauline. Mark Davidson himself stood on the stage and talked about justice for Pauline and this, that, and the other. And Mike Parsons talks about justice for Pauline, and so, and even Mike Elam has talked about justice for Pauline. Now, what I find interesting about that is, first of all, Mike Elam himself has intimated that Pauline was, was a stripper, an exotic dancer. By his, I believe that's the way he termed it, but doesn't offer, I've yet to see a shred of evidence on that. Now, how on earth is that, how is that not derogatory against Pauline? Is that justice for Pauline? Making up a claim that she was an exotic dancer without a shred of proof? How is that getting justice for Pauline? And in regards to Mike Elam and Mike Parson and Mark Davidson, that, they talk about justice for Pauline, and they went to all this trouble to get the autopsy, get her exhumed and get this autopsy. and then they don't even read the report. Mark Davidson, well, it's either that they read it and lied about it, or that they didn't read it at all. So how is that justice for Pauline? You went to all that trouble to exhume her body from her grave and disturb the remains of her children, the way I understand it, and then you don't even bother to take 5 minutes out of your day to read the report. That's damning. That's shameful. It's almost unforgivable, in my opinion. So, you don't get to point your finger at others when you yourself are the people that are defaming Pauline and her memory. Then he names a bunch of people: O'Neill Moffett, P.D. Plunk, Jim Moffett, Carl Pusser, Ricky Plunk. All point to the same source of the carbine. Well, he mentions Carl Pusser. I don't know. I'm scratching my head over that one right off the bat. I'd have to, can you show me the documentation that Carl Pusser said that Buford Pusser received at one of the stolen rifles from O'Neill Moffett, also that carbine was in the car the day of the shooting? Can you show me that? Seems like you're making a pretty good claim there. O'Neill Moffett, you bring up P.D. Plunk. Okay, well, where is the interview of P.D. Plunk where he admits to going into the car at the crime scene and removing this M1 carbine and giving it to his son, and that M1 carbine is tied to O'Neill? Can you show me that? He brings up Jim Moffett. Well, Jim Moffett, according to the Agent Blackwell statement, or non-statement, if you will, he claims that Jim Moffett brings up, he knows the source, but Jim Moffett himself said that there were no rifles in the trunk. So that's a problem, right? And then let's see, Ricky Plunk and O'Neill Moffett. Well, Ricky Plunk, he tells us that according to he got the rifle from his dad, P.D. Plunk, and that supposedly P.D. Plunk had told him that that rifle was one of the rifles that O'Neill Moffett stole from the Air Force. Now, I did a whole video on that, and there's documented evidence out there, like official government, court records that prove that the rifle that Ricky Plunk has was not one of the rifles that was stolen from the Air Force. And I saw your comment, Mike, on the video, and you suggested that these were surplus rifles and this, that, but those were not surplus rifles, sir. Excuse me, sir. Those were not surplus rifles. Those were specifically designated to go into survival kits for pilots. And remember, we were ramping up about, with the Vietnam War and all that. And not only that, but the rifles that O'Neill Moffett stole were different than the one that Ricky Plunk had, because the ones that O'Neill stole, they had the fold up stock. They had to be compact to go into these survival kits for the pilots. So it wasn't even the right type of rifle. And then O'Neill Moffett. Now, and again, I've already told you, we've already covered that was not one of the rifles that was stolen from the Air Force. It just wasn't. Sorry. So that's that. Moving on to conspiracy. He claims that I suggested this conspiracy between Roush, Davidson, and Parson. Well, I didn't do that in my video. I was specifically talking about Parson and Elam. And I didn't necessarily. I said kind of a collusion, not necessarily a conspiracy, because like again, we know that Parson, by his own words, was monitoring social media going back to 2022, or actually 2021, I think is when, because he talked about it in 2022. It's documented. He made up a fake account and he was monitoring social media. And then lo and behold, one of the first people that he meets with in this investigation is Mike Elam. Mike and Dennis. That's a problem. Well, not necessarily. It wouldn't have been a problem. I mean, if he would have said, like, when he met with all these other people that was providing information to the TBI, typically they interviewed them. There's a recording, either a phone call recording or an email chain, or they met in person. But when it comes to Mike Elam, we don't get that. And in regards to Dennis talked to a lot of these witnesses before they talked to the TBI. Matter of fact, Parson, if you listen to the recording with Abernathy's son, Dennis is there with Mike Parson, which is odd because Mike Parson makes a big deal, and all these recordings talk about, we're confidential, we don't divulge what you say to somebody else. But here's Dennis, another one of the witnesses, and he's bringing him to this interview with Abernathy. Doesn't that kind of destroy the whole confidentiality argument? So I'm simply pointing out the fact that you had an investigation, an original investigation by the original TBI agents that was leading them to a different conclusion. That it was an ambush, and that there are suspects that they were looking into. Now, Mike Parson makes a fake account, and he's monitoring social media. So he's seeing all these conspiratorial claims, these conspiracy theories, on YouTube, on Facebook. So he's putting all this together. He lobbies to get the case reopened, and then he gets assigned to the case, and then lo and behold, he's meeting with Mike Elam, and lo and behold, the whole investigation is steered by Elam sending him different things, news articles. Hey, talk to this person, talk to that person. Oh, here's these audio recordings, blah, 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 blah. And then we end up with the result, which kind of mirrors what he had in his book. So, it's a wild, at the very least, it's a wild coincidence. And it wasn't independent. It wasn't, it wasn't the suggestion that these were independent folks, like Mike Elam did his research and the TBI did their research independently of each other, and they arrived at the same conclusion. That's what the suggestion that Elam's making. But it's hard to make that suggestion when you did yours, you contact them, and then they consult with you, you give them evidence, you give them a list of witnesses, and then they go, that's not an independent, you guys aren't operating independently. The claim for independence would have been if you had wrote your book, and then the TBI of their own volition reopened the investigation, and then they went out and did their own thing, and then they came, and then they reached the same conclusion. That's independence. That's people operating independently of each other. holding meetings with each other, emailing information to each other, emailing evidence, and that's not independent. That's coordination. You were operating they were operating in conjunction and in association with you, sir. Okay, so that now and it wouldn't necessarily had to have do I think David Roush was involved in? No. David Roush is off doing other things. He's trying to get a White House job. Okay, he's trying to take the next step. He wants to be at the high federal levels. He doesn't care about Tennessee. Tennessee's a stepping stone. Same thing with Mark Davidson. Mark Davidson, I don't think was in coordination. I just think he wanted the headlines. He was in it for the press. So the next thing, asking for documentation to tie the weapon to a suspect isn't investigative reasoning. Well, that's just simply laughable. I mean, that is absolutely stupid. That's stupid. That it's like, tell me you don't know anything about running an investigation without telling me that you don't know anything about running an investigation. Of course you would want actual documentation. And that isn't investigative reasoning. You're crazy. You're absolutely crazy to even suggest that. And again, put the crack pipe down and just say no. Get yourself some help. Get to the Betty Ford Clinic if you have to. But yeah, I want documentation, because guess what? The suggestion is that this would go to a grand jury, which would ultimately lead to a trial. Guess what a court wants? They want real evidence. They don't want second and third hearsay. I mean, look at it this way. If you, let's say, one day you're sitting at home and out of the blue, your mortgage company calls up and says, hey, we are going to increase your mortgage payment an extra $500 a month. And then you say, well, why? And they give you some reason. And then you say, well, can you show me that in writing where I agree to that? And they say, nah, trust me, bro. Just take my word for it. I mean, now, is anybody watching this going to tell me that they would simply take the person's word for it and just shell out the extra $500? Of course not. Of course not. No way. So I want documentation. Yes. Yes. If you're telling me that rifle belonged to Buford, then yes, I want something more than the Ricky Plunk story. Okay? I want something more than that. And you can't do it. You can't do it. And so now you want to throw out evidence. I mean, you don't even know what evidence is, sir. Okay, cold case not closed. Now, I never said, going back to last week's video, I never said the case was closed. I said it was closed pending new leads and information. Okay? And as a matter of fact, let me pull something up real quick. All right, so take a look here. This is a document from the TBI report, and it says right there, Director Goodwin. It's this was dated February 10th, 1977. To Director Goodwin, and it's in regard to the case file 5644, Pauline Pusser victim. Says, please advise on this one. And what he's referring to was he wrote a letter. This was from John Sloan, the TBI agent assigned to the case. He wrote a letter to the director of the TBI, Director Goodwin, saying that they hadn't had any new leads. They hadn't had any new information, and so he just wanted to close the file pending, unless they get any new leads or information. Because that's typically that happens a lot with cold cases. And if you look at the reds, the information circled in red, it's dated from Director Goodwin. He dated it. Looks like July 11th, 1977. John will close file, subject to reopen if any leads develop, and that's his initials, RG, RC Goodwin. And so that's my evidence on that. So I think I've addressed that issue. The next one, number 11, evidence carries weight, opinion does not. Well, let me talk about that too, because this is a claim that I hear so much on that side, from that side of the fence. Well, you never offer any evidence. You just sit up there and give your opinion, and you just make claims and blah 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 blah. Folks, literally every video I do, I show documents, just like I just did. I just showed you a document from the TBI report. Okay, all throughout this video, I've shown evidence. Okay, let's talk about evidence. If we were in a courtroom, if you're in a courtroom, it doesn't matter which side submits evidence to the court. Once it's submitted to the court and the judge admits it into evidence, it's fair game for either side. So just because the prosecution submits something for evidence and it's admitted by the judge doesn't mean that the defense can't use that piece of evidence to prove their case. Classic example of this, everybody think back to the OJ trial. We all remember this famous piece of video that's out there where the prosecution, the state, had submitted these bloody gloves to the court as evidence to prove OJ's guilt, and it was admitted. The judge admitted it. The gloves were laid out on the table right there next to OJ. And what does OJ do? He picks up the gloves and tries to put them on. Now he does a terrible job, a half-hearted effort to try to put those gloves on. But the image of him struggling, and it looks like, oh, they don't fit. What did we end up with? The famous classic line, if it doesn't fit, you must acquit. So the defense used evidence that the prosecution submitted to help free their client. Okay? So that's how it works. Maybe that's a news flash. Maybe that's a news flash to folks on the other side, that's just used to people posting stuff on Facebook, and that just becomes reality. But in the real world, and when you're talking about evidence is evidence. Okay, it can be used by either side, and that's what I do when I make a claim. I pull something from the TBI report, or maybe from an FBI file, or maybe from some other court document, or maybe a newspaper article, or a video clip. But that's all evidence, folks. It's all evidence. Everything, the TBI report itself, if this was a trial, would become evidence. Fair game. It's fair game for me. It's fair game for Mike Elam. We both can. So let's stop this insanity where you keep making claims. And you know what, Mike? You can say it however many times you want, buddy. But just because you keep mumbling things over and over again doesn't make it fact. Doesn't make it any more true. So, increasingly I'm coming to the conclusion that you just don't know what you're talking about. You seem like a guy that got into this, and people have inflated your ego, and you think you've tagged yourself as a cold case investigator, but sir, you don't know what you're talking about. What evidence have I brought forward? Now, I just went through all that, and I know, and that's another thing. Mike likes to talk down to people, act like he's above them, and all of that. And he brings people on his podcast like Jason White and Danny Couples and whoever that the other lady was that used to go on Nancy Grace a lot. And it's kind of like credibility through osmosis. You use them, you use their credibility to make you credible. You use their experience and try to, cloak yourself in it to pass yourself off as that. And I know I see your videos where you've got all these badges and stuff and CSI and things in the background, as if somehow that makes you something, and it's just crazy. It's just crazy. And I feel bad for you. I really do. But yeah, what evidence have I brought forward? I have brought forth a plethora of evidence. It's all in my videos, every one of them. Now, you may choose to discount it. You may choose not to watch it, and that's fine. I don't care. That's not my concern. But it doesn't take away from the fact that, yes, I have submitted evidence all the time, every video. So that's pretty much my response to the open letter from my biggest fan, Oakley Baldwin wannabe, Mike Elam. So, and like I've said before, like I said in the last video, life is too short. Life is too short to live your life jealous of people and hating on people and holding grudges and trying to antagonize and instigate and agitate. Why? At your age, you should be enjoying yourself. You should be enjoying life. You should be spending time with your wife, going on trips and basking in this. Look, like you said it yourself, you got what you wanted, and so enjoy it, buddy. Enjoy it. But trying to nonstop silence people and attack people, and it's just a bad look. Makes you look like a narcissist. I don't know what else to say. But that's it, folks. This has turned into a 2-hour video. I didn't really expect that. But if you hung in to the end, I tip my hat off to you. But before I go, I mentioned it at the beginning of the video. I just want to put a plug in for this book right here. And again, I'm not getting paid for this. I don't get a dime out of any of this, but I'm just simply doing this to raise awareness and get some more information out there. But I'm pretty sure you can go on Amazon.com and order that way, and I think if you visit the museum, you can pick up a copy there. But that's all I got for today's video, folks. I apologize for a 2-hour video, but hey, I think, that's another thing too. I think what I'm going to do is every Friday will be every Friday will be the Buford Pusser content, and then eventually I'm going to start doing some videos on other cases. And what I'm going to do is I will put those cases. I'll do those videos on Monday for people that are interested. If you're not, don't, it's no big deal. And then so Fridays will be Buford Pusser, Mondays will be for other cases, and then also I'm gonna quit slacking and get the rest of those audio recordings out. I think I've only got a couple left. But other than that, folks, I hope you guys are doing well, and I hope you have a great weekend this weekend. And I will see you guys on the next video. Thanks for watching. Take care, everybody.